Part 57. He blackmails penicillin again for his lover's cure. In the morning, Xuan Huaifeng became hot again. Bai Xuelan woke up immediately, and hurriedly went to find the German doctor. And the explanation was the same. Luckily, Bai Xuelan had a lot of money, and asked for 10 penicillin in one go. As long as there was a high fever, one would be enough. After the injection, the high fever slowly went down again. On this day, Bai Xuelan refused to leave the ward again, so he went in and out of the ward, talked to Adjutant's son in the corridor on official business, signed documents, and ordered someone to call the General Administration of Customs to supervise all matters, and asked about Xuan Huaifeng's diet. Unexpectedly, when Xuan Huaifeng's wound was changed, the test came. Bai Xuelan was talking with Song Ren in the corridor, and when he saw the nurse pushing a small metal car painted with white paint over, he knew that Xuan Huaifeng was going to change the medicine, so he put Song Ren aside first and turned his head into the ward. The nurses came in and saw Bai Xuelan and said, "I want to change the dressing for the patient's wound, please wait outside." Bai Xuelan smiled and said, "Is there anything I can't see? I'm not afraid to tell you, I was just injured a while ago." "It's a gun." The nurses knew that he was an important person, and when they saw him say this, they stopped persuading him, and decided to do it in the past. Bai Xuelan hurriedly said, "I'll help you." He uncovered half of Xuan Huaifeng's body, only covering his legs. When the nurse was about to untie Xuan Huaifeng's hospital gown, Bai Xuelan said, "I'll do this." Gently and carefully, Xuan Huaifeng's abdomen was covered with white gauze. The nurse smiled and said, "Yo, sir, don't you do all our work?" Bai Xuelan laughed unintentionally, and said, "I don't understand the gauze, you are professionals, and a layman like me can't compare. Be careful not to hurt him." Xuan Huaifeng was looked at by the nurses, embarrassed, and said to Bai Xuelan, "Go outside, there are nurses, what's wrong?" Bai Xuelan, "No, I want to stay here, just cheer up." Xuan Huaifeng sighed, "You underestimate me too." As they were talking, the two nurses also started to work. One was fiddling with the bottles in the small metal car. The other person came over and untied the gauze on Xuan Huaifeng's abdomen. Bai Xuelan sat on the head of the bed and let Xuan Huaifeng's limelight rest on his thigh, which was even tighter than staring at his wound, and kept saying, "Be careful, be gentle, take your time, don't be in a hurry, don't be too hurry up." His eyes were terrifying, and his mouth kept talking. The nurse was calm at first, but later became a little confused, and when he was a little careless, he made a mistake when removing the medicinal tape. Xuan Huaifeng frowned slightly. Bai Xuelan said angrily, Look, I told you to be careful, why didn't you hear my words?" The nurse had quite a few years of experience, and had seen many family members of patients. She didn't have Bai Xuelan's number, so she couldn't help but retort, "Your husband is also true, since this is the case, we will not change it. We can only ask you to do it yourself." It is strange to say that no matter how big the official hat is, as long as a person comes to the hospital, he seems to be shorter than the doctors and nurses. Although life and death depend on heaven, offending these people when they are sick is the least interesting. Bai Xuelan thought that Xuan Huaifeng's injury depended on these people, glared at her, and had no choice but to keep silent. It was the first time that Xuan Huaifeng saw him deflated. He was actually angered by a nurse. Xuan Huaifeng couldn't help laughing. His lips just twitched, and the gauze covering the wound was lifted. His expression changed, and he frowned. Bai Xuelan asked anxiously, "How is it? It hurts a lot, right?" Xuan Huaifeng endured it and said, "It's okay. Although this grab didn't hit the internal organs, the lead bullet has always been a poison. Yesterday, the bullet was removed from the operation. in order to eliminate mutual sex. Gauze soaked with medicine was still stuffed inside. Now use tweezers to clip the wound, and the gauze that is clipped is stained with stench of blood. Xuan Huaifeng frowned in pain, thinking. It turns out that the gunshot wound needs to be changed in this way. No wonder Bai Xuelan was shot a while ago, and he always refused to let me see it, but he was very considerate of me. He raised his head and glanced at Bai Xuelan. Bai Xuelan noticed it and asked, "Does it hurt a lot?" "You must bear it." Xuan Huaifeng still said, "It's okay." Bai Xuelan said, "This level has to be passed. Who told you to win?" "Where's the gun? I'll hold your hand. If it hurts, squeeze me hard." He grabbed Xuan Huaifeng's hand. Xuan Huaifeng was both moved and sighed, and said to him, "There are a lot of people who have been shot these days. Don't worry, I won't be so useless." "Wouldn't I just change the medicine?" Bai Xuelan sighed. "Oh, you don't understand." The nurses continued to do their work, picking out the gauze from the wound. One person took a piece of cotton with tweezers, dipped it in a liquid bottle, and rubbed it into the wound. Xuan Huaifeng was caught off guard and cried out in pain, "Yeah." Bai Xuelan was like being cut with a knife. While hugging Xuan Huaifeng tightly, he shouted at the nurse, "Isn't this intentional? I must complain to the dean." The nurse was both afraid and annoyed at him, so she said, "What do you want us to do? The wound doesn't need to be wiped with alcohol. How can I disinfect it? If it is not disinfected, how can I change the dressing for him?" Bai Xuelan said, "If you want to wipe the alcohol, you won't know beforehand?" The nurse said, "Okay, I've told you now. Do you still wipe it? If you don't wipe it, or I will lift my hand, or I will directly change the dressing without sterilization. I will do what your husband says." "Let's do it." Demonstratingly. Put the tweezers into the disinfection tray on the little white car. Bai Xuelan was so angry that his veins jumped, and he would have taught her a lesson in normal times. But now Xuan Huaifeng has become a piece of fish on the chopping board and has to be soft. He also knew that this disinfection was necessary, and if he hurried a nurse and came by himself, he would not be able to do it. He swallowed his anger and said, "I understand your difficulties, so just do as you normally do." The nurse was dealing with other patients, and she had already gotten angry because she knew that Bai Xuelan was a big guy and there were so many guards outside. Not daring to go too far, she silently glanced at Bai Xuelan and picked up the tweezers again with a cold face. The cotton sample just now was no longer usable, so I took a new piece and dipped it into an alcohol bottle. She reached to the wound and rubbed it inside and out. In the injured area, it is most painful to touch salt and wine. Xuan Huaifeng did not expect such a step. As soon as the tweezers were stretched into the wound, his temples jumped in pain. Bai Xuelan hurriedly asked, "What? It hurts badly? Call it out if you feel pain." Xuan Huaifeng shook his head. In front of Bai Xuelan, he didn't want to lose his temper, just bit his lower lip and inhaled deeply, his limbs stretched hard. But no matter what he thinks in his heart, his body is very unwilling to cooperate. He was spoiled by his father, who was a commander since he was a child, and he was also brought up with pride, especially when he couldn't eat pain. After a while, cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and the front strands of hair were wet. His face was also pale. The tweezers, which were flat with alcohol cotton, were like knives poking inside. Bai Xuelan was in so much pain that his heart was broken, and he couldn't help but say, "Wait, this is not the way. Give him some morphine, otherwise how can he bear it?" The nurse said, "Just change the medicine and give him morphine. What about those who have amputees? Morphine is not easy to get now. Besides, it's not too painful, and it's over once he endures it. If he takes morphine like this, it will become addictive. You can't give him some morphine every time he changes his medicine?" Bai Xuelan glared angrily. It's not like rubbing alcohol on your wound. How do you know it's not a big pain? Also, Xuan Huaifeng moved in his arms, drooping his eyelids, and whispered, no need morphine. Since it was him who spoke, Bai Xuelan couldn't say anything else. He had no choice but to hug Xuan Huaifeng tightly and coaxed him softly. The nurses continued to use alcohol to clean the wound. Xuan Huaifeng's body trembled slightly every time she wiped it. After a while, the original cotton was no longer needed, and a new one soaked in alcohol was replaced. Bai Xuelan only felt that he was going crazy, and said impatiently, why do you still need to change cotton? How much is it? The nurse said angrily, it's always been like this. Is it because you're impatient, we're going to take things out of the way? Did you do it so? That's not good for the injured. Xuan Huaifeng trembled in pain, and felt that Bai Xuelan was also trembling with him. Both moved and emotional. He gasped and said to Bai Xuelan, don't watch here, go out. Bai Xuelan firmly said, no. I must accompany you. Xuan Huaifeng smiled bitterly. This self-torture, what's the point? Besides, my wound must be changed. Bai Xuelan asked back. Did I go out and stay outside and think about what's going on inside, so I won't be tortured? At this time, the two nurses were also early seeing the clue, while doing things. She frequently peeks at the scene between the two. In the past, Xuan Huaifeng was very embarrassed and shameful. Only now, one of the wounds was extremely painful. And the other was that Bai Xuelan moved him so much that he didn't care so much about the things around him. He put one side of his face tightly on Bai Xuelan's thigh, and held Bai Xuelan's hand tightly with one hand, secretly feeling that this would give him a lot of strength and help. It took me a long time to boil, but I finally got rid of the poison. The nurse put the new yellow gauze soaked in medicine into the wound again, and it was another severe pain drenched in cold sweat. When the bandages were properly wrapped, Xuan Huaifeng both breathed a sigh of relief. It's like torture. The nurse said, isn't this coming? If I said it earlier, it would hurt for a while. We are serious. But you scolded us. Xuan Huaifeng said softly, I'm sorry. Although Bai Xuelan always gave looking for trouble, but Xuan Huaifeng was a handsome and gentle patient. The nurse gave him a smile and said, you don't have to be so polite. When changing the medicine, please stop yelling at us. Xuan Huaifeng was shocked. Do you want to change it tomorrow? The nurse smiled and said, the lead bullets are very poisonous. If you don't change the medicine, the flesh and bones will rot. You need to change the medicine for a few days before the operation. The little white car went out. Xuan Huaifeng heard that he was going to do it again in the next few days. Thinking of the pain just now, he looked like he had lingering fears. Bai Xuelan took a clean handkerchief and helped him test the sweat on his forehead, and said, don't be afraid. These few days will pass. I'll be here with you every time. Xuan Huaifeng was silent for a long time. Finally, he sighed guiltily, looked at Bai Xuelan, and said, I think back now. When you were injured, I was really bad to you. I'm making you angry. Now it's my turn. It's really not worth letting you treat me like this. Bai Xuelan said. Now you finally know how unfair you were to me. Xuan Huaifeng smiled bitterly. The next one sentence, don't you want to ask me about a moral compensation? Bai Xuelan said. Compensation is compensation. What is moral or immoral? Such a whisper, as if it had the same effect as morphine. The two whispered, gradually forgetting the pain just now, and unknowingly, they picked up a sweet kiss again. Since that day, Bai Xuelan has made up his mind more and more, and asked the housekeeper to pack his belongings in a box. All laundry and personal items are neatly occupied in a short cabinet, as if they were going to be in the ward. The appearance of a long companion. Xuan Huaifeng knew that he couldn't stop him. And he was actually looking forward to having him by his side during the dressing change, so he didn't say anything. Later, when he saw that he didn't leave during the day, he couldn't help but wonder, you don't even do official business. Did you do it? How did it happen? It's rumored that I'm the culprit. Bai Xuelan said, it's nothing, when I was shot. Did I go to the office every day to do business? I've already said hello to Adjutant Sun, and it doesn't matter. Press it first, and bring the documents over here. And the same is true for me signing here. Look, I have the seal of the Chief of Customs in my bag. He took out the seal and held it up in front of Xuan Huaifeng. Sure enough, in the next few days, Bai Xuelan stayed close to each other. Outside, Song Ren led the guards at 3 steps, 1 post, 5 steps and 1 post. Regardless of Zhang San and Li Si who came to visit, they all refused. And Xuan Huaifeng was lying inside, not knowing. This one inside and one outside, 2 barriers that water can't get in, complete the sweet little paradise for Bai Xuelan and Xuan Huaifeng. Gradually, Xuan Huaifeng got used to it and asked Bai Xuelan to help with personal matters, and it was not so awkward. The more you sit down, the more intimacy that no one else can match. The more intimacy it seems to be more than a relative. Those so-called romantic memories with Lin Qijun are even more insignificant. Xuan Huaifeng occasionally thinks of it and sighs in his heart. That day I always felt that Plato's love was the most beautiful. In fact, since the day of birth, people can't avoid being put in a stinky skin, and they have to eat, only based on spiritual feelings. How can it be compared to the emotions that are flesh and blood, visible and palpable? For example, when changing dressings, without Bai Xuelan holding his hand. I really can't imagine how I can resist the pain of rubbing the wound with alcohol. I told the nurse that for the next few days, the dressings will be changed every day. Every time the dressings are changed, they will be disinfected with alcohol. So, he screamed in pain, gritted his teeth and endured it. The pus and blood when the wound was changed slowly was not so heavy. However, fever is still common. This made Bai Xuelan very troubled. Sometimes if it doesn't burn in the morning, it will burn in the afternoon, if it doesn't burn in the afternoon. Maybe the forehead will get hot again at night. Bai Xuelan regarded Xuan Huaifeng as more important than his life, and couldn't bear any accident, so he had a slight fever. So he needed an injection from the doctor, and he actually used penicillin, which is more expensive than gold, like boiled water. Later, even the German doctor couldn't help and persuade him, saying, Mr. Pai, this, penicillin, is a very valuable medicine. The patient's burn is not severe, so there is no need for frequent injections. Maybe stick to it and not inject penicillin can also be used. Bai Xuelan snorted. Others can't use it, so you have to persevere. I can afford it, don't worry about it. Just use it in the safest way. So, in less than 4 days, 10 sticks of penicillin that money can't buy just ran out. Adjutant Sun came to the ward, reported the matter to Bai Xuelan, and added, the doctor said that Adjutant Xuan's injury is stable now, and the possibility of infection is not high, so penicillin is probably not needed. Bai Xuelan said, this is not necessarily true. If there is an accidental infection at that time, it will be a sudden death if you can't find the medicine temporarily. Adjutant Sun asked, what should I do? Bai Xuelan said, I'd better go and get 10 more for spare. That's fine. Adjutant Sun also knew that it was a military drug, and it was more dangerous to reach out to this thing than to reach out to public funds. After hesitating for a while, he suggested, this time, in my opinion, you should go to the Prime Minister's office in person. Tell the Prime Minister that it is better to cross the bright road. Bai Xuelan smiled and said, did I say that I'm going to write a note under false name this time? The last time was an emergency. So I had to do it. Huaifeng looks good today. Okay, I'll go see the Prime Minister and help him get rid of it. These 10 medicines are here. When I'm not around, I'll ask him to you. Look inside. And call Song Ren outside to keep an eye on it. Adjutant's son also smiled. Yo, this is not an internal matter to ask Zhang Zhao, an external matter. Ask Zhou Yu? You are too meticulous to walk away for so little effort. Bai Xuelan said, take care of me anyway. When he is healed, I will naturally reward everyone. Ask the driver to prepare the car and go to the Prime Minister's office in person. When they arrived at the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister happened to be there. Bai Xuelan was no one else. Naturally, there was no need to inform him first and then wait in the reception hall outside. With a nod to the guard, he went straight to the Prime Minister's office and knocked on the door. When he opened the door and went in, he said, I have a request today. Prime Minister Bai was reading the newspaper and frowned when he saw Bai Xuelan enter the door, put the newspaper on the table, and said, come on, you came just right. Let me ask you, the General Administration of Customs has been making frequent moves recently, all of a sudden to strengthen the random inspection of ships. And all of a sudden to provide tariffs on imported goods. Are you a jerk? Bai Xuelan said, this is a serious official business, what do you call me a jerk? The Prime Minister gave him a stern look. I still don't know your temper that is not afraid of death? You can't stop until you smash the sky. Look at it for yourself. There are consecutive reports in the newspaper, all of which are negative news about you. He flipped the newspaper on the table. Bai Xuelan only glanced at the headline, but it was not a good word to read, and said indifferently, it's obvious that those shameful reporters took bribes from businessmen and talk nonsense on it. Do you believe this? What kind of people say that 10% of the dog farts? You. Prime Minister Bai was so angry at his precious cousin that he was about to scold him. But he felt that this person was not afraid of scolds at all, so there was no good way to deal with him. He sighed and said, you are my family, that's why I advised you. If you change someone else, you will get out of the traffic. You are actually a smart person, why don't you think about your future? There are many people around you. I've been offended to death. What can I do? If he reprimanded him like he always did, Bai Xuelan would still be able to say a word or two with a smile on his face. As powerful as Bai Xuelan, he could only sit on the sofa with his buttocks and listen with all sincerity. Prime Minister Bai first counted his reckless actions, and said, if you stop drugs, you will stop at the customs seriously. I know your aspirations, and I won't say anything about you. However, if you want, when I think about it, there is such a big murder case in Jinghua building, you can't say it like you, right? Now you have to offend all the businessmen. I heard the wind. And even the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce couldn't help but want to speak. I don't seem to be enlightened, and one day I hit the south wall. And it's too late to cry. Bai Xuelan was silent for a long time. When Prime Minister Bai came to an end, he sighed. Cousin, you say these things are for my own good, I know. But if everyone leaves a way for themselves, what will this country be like? Don't I? Do you know that guns are the first bird? Let me tell you, I have thought about it for a long time. The world is too dark, black as thick ink. Even if I, Bai Xuelan, don't have the ability to turn it white by my own strength, I can't call it only black. At least, give it some blood. The blood of those bastard drug dealers, I am blood, for so-called. With a cold smile on his face, no matter how you fix it, you don't need to follow the rules, you don't need to be fearful. But you have to try which one is ruthless. He paused, grinding his fine white teeth. I will use compassion and the power of diamond to save these dogs. He was usually unruly and stubborn. But at this moment, he said these words, but it was obvious that he had thought carefully. His expression was solemn and calm, and his tone was low and intimidating. Prime Minister Pai was speechless after hearing this for a long time. After a while, he sighed. Brother, I know, it's not an ordinary person. This is to cut flesh to feed the eagle. Bai Xuelan laughed. Okay, it's at the level of cutting flesh to feed the eagle, and I didn't want to become a Buddha. Speaking of cutting meat, I also want to cut the meat of the old owls. Those bosses who get imported products make a lot of money every year. Why, if they raise a little tariff, they will complain a lot. The money is used on bitches they don't feel bad about 10 times more. Prime Minister Pai said. Of course they have to complain, and they plan to unite with everyone to protest and submit a letter. But I think that these people are different from drug dealers and cannot be treated as hard. After all, they are there, business is prosperous. Suppressing them. Although the country has a little more money, it also has bad consequences. Bai Xuelan explained, it was officially for the sake of business, and I forcibly raised tariffs. Now national assets are growing. Many patriotic businessmen buy their own machines, open factories, save the country, and do our own industry in China. At this time, we can only stare blankly and do nothing. Therefore, I will strengthen the inspection and mention the tax on foreign goods. Reduce the speed of the influx of foreign goods. Even if they come in, their cost will naturally be higher. This way, it can also find some sales for our products made in China, and take a breath. Think about it. If we can all in the future use modern things made in China, what kind of kettle, gramophone and glass jar are all made in China, isn't it good? Prime Minister Pai smiled, waved his hand, and said, You, on the surface, are a pragmatic person. In your bones, you are actually naive and idealistic. If the policy of the General Administration of Customs changes, will it only offend the businessmen? I really should let you sit in my position and know how much trouble there is in diplomacy. Recently, there have been many foreign consuls have all come to protest, saying that their products have been treated unfairly. Isn't that why you are causing me trouble? Bai Xuelan roguely spread out his hands and said, I am not in your position. I do not seek political affairs. It's your prime responsibility, I can't control it. Anyway, the General Administration of Customs is here, I won't change my mind. I have to say first. Even if you ordered me to transfer the customs back, I would have other ways to toss them. Look at them. Well, I always have my own way. Prime Minister Pai gave him a dissatisfied look and said, Are those ways really your own? Bai Xuelan asked, What do you mean by that? Prime Minister Pai said, Don't think I don't know. You can't do random checks and tax adjustments without your adjutant's advice. Bai Xuelan said, That's right. Adjutant's son is very good at handling things. Stop pretending. Prime Minister Pai snorted. Adjutant's son did it for you, but it was just a small matter. The other surnamed Xuan is really powerful. I'm afraid he is your General Administration of Customs. It's very important to adjust the big policy, right? Bai Xuelan seemed to have never heard of it. I was asked again by my cousin, but instead I stood up and walked to the small Western-style wine cabinet, poured a glass of soda water on my own, and sipped slowly in my hand. Prime Minister Pai said, Sure enough, I guessed it. Bai Xuelan then said, These views of his are beneficial to the country. If they are wrong, I will never adopt them. Patriotic. It's just that you do things out of your own hands. If you are unlucky in the future, it will also be your unlucky, nothing to do with him. If the newspaper is scolding him now, I wonder if he can still be patriotic? Bai Xuelan was impatiently said, Who is the chief of customs? It's me. Is there anything? What is my adjutant doing? Prime Minister Pai said, Look. I just told the truth. You just lose your temper like this. It shows that he has influenced you too much. It's amazing. Bai Xuelan was sulking, drank the soda in the glass in one go. Reached out to hold the vodka glass bottle, suddenly paused, changed his mind, and went to a tasteless glass of soda water. Prime Minister Bai looked at it and asked, I heard that you don't drink now, is it because of him? Bai Xuelan said, I can drink whatever I like, isn't it a good thing not to drink? This adjutant. It's not a good thing for you to be so important. Bai Xuelan came here this time, originally wanting to confess the last time he took away penicillin by writing a slip of paper. But now listening to Prime Minister Pai's meaning, if he said it again, it would become Xuan Huaifeng's criminal evidence, so he would not bring it up. It's just that the next medicine cannot be dispensed with. In the office they were awkwardly silent for a while. Bai Xuelan drank the glass of soda in his hand again, took a clean glass, poured a glass of red and charming wine, and put it in front of Prime Minister Bai. Prime Minister Bai thought he was angry, but he suddenly changed his attitude and raised his eyes to look at him. What are you doing? Bai Xuelan smiled and said, Of course I borrowed flowers to offer Buddha. Prime Minister Bai said, I understand, you have something to ask me. Bai Xuelan said, Yes. Otherwise, I wouldn't rush over here. Prime Minister Bai picked up the wine with a beautiful gesture, shook it gently, and said helplessly, Little bastard, use this Prime Minister's wine. You're here to ask the Prime Minister to do things for you. Let me tell you, what's the big deal? Bai Xuelan said, I was shot last time, and I still have lingering fears. I heard it wrong. You, who only eat leopard gall, have lingering fears. Bai Xuelan said sternly. What's strange, who would want to be shot inexplicably? However, I think it was after the last gunshot wound. I had a fever once, like an infection. The doctor said that if the trauma becomes infected, it is likely to die. Prime Minister Bai couldn't understand and frowned. Aren't you okay? Bai Xuelan said, This time it's okay. There is no guarantee that there will be no next time. You also know that the people I offend are desperados. I heard that the headquarters has brought a batch of penicillin this time. Prime Minister Bai suddenly shook his head and said, I can give you other things, this batch of penicillin. It can't be bought with money, and it's clearly stipulated in the probationary process. If the average person needs it, they won't approve it. Only generals who lead troops to fight can get it. Bai Xuelan asked, Can't I be the head of the customs, and I can't even compare to an old rude who leads troops to fight? Prime Minister Bai said, Xuelan, you are making excuses. If you are injured and need this, naturally I will give it. Now you are very good, what do you want this for? Bai Xuelan said. Let's put it aside and prepare for a while, I am so relieved. If there is an accident, would it be troublesome if I have to pick it up temporarily? Prime Minister Bai shook his head and said, It's not like this, it shouldn't be like this. Bai Xuelan asked, Then, Prime Minister, this is something about my life. Do you want to give it or not? Are you really using this for yourself? Bai Xuelan asked back, It's not for yourself, but for someone else? Prime Minister Bai said, I know. Your adjutant was injured in the Jinghua building and is now lying in a German hospital. It wasn't in your name, it was on him, right? Bai Xuelan avoided answering and asked with a stubborn neck. Then you give it, or not? Prime Minister Bai looked at his expression, knowing that if he doesn't give it, I'm afraid he won't do it. If he really fights it, with Bai Xuelan's fearless personality, he might make a big hole for himself to clean up the aftermath. Although penicillin is precious, there are thousands of sticks in this batch, so it's okay to give a few sticks. Prime Minister Bai smiled and said, Since you opened your mouth, I can only sell your face. Bai Xuelan said, Thank you. Prime Minister Bai said, however, in the General Administration of Customs, only you are qualified to use this precious. You took your share of the medicine this time. And if you ask for it next time, I won't be able to give it to you. If you ask for it once, I'll give it once. Bai Xuelan said, that's fine. Please write a note to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister Bai was helpless. He turned over a government official note on his desk, wrote a line with a pen, looked at it, opened the drawer, took out the official seal, stamped a bright red round seal, and handed it to Bai Xuelan. Asked, how is it? You should be satisfied this time? Bai Xuelan looked at it and said, no. The number is not enough. It's not a medicine that can be bought in the market. Bai Xuelan said, I don't want more, just give 10. After a round of grinding, Prime Minister Bai was forced to write another note, which stated that approved the customs of the General Administration received 10 penicillin. Prime Minister Bai took back the original one, tore it up in front of Bai Xuelan, spread out his hand and said, drinking my own glass of imported wine, you beat me to the punch. You really know how to do business. Sighed. Bai Xuelan fulfilled his wish, and his handsome face naturally showed a flattering smile, and said happily, we are a family, I make money from business, and you won't lose any money, Prime Minister. I'm so grateful, I don't dare to disturb you anymore. He bowed slightly to Prime Minister Bai, took the note he asked for and went downstairs. And immediately urged the driver to go to the headquarters to get the medicine.